Year was 1887 in Toledo, Ohio. In a wooden shed behind a country doctor's house, a Civil War veteran who survived Vicksburg was tinkering on a new device to help his patients. He was Toledo's first ear, nose, and throat specialist, and he was pained by the discomfort it caused when he would stick cotton swabs laden with petroleum jelly down the throats of his patients. He took a hollow rubber ball, a piece of metal tubing cut from a discarded surgical instrument, and the base of a small oil can, and fit them together. He filled the jar with petroleum jelly, held it over a candle flame until the semi solid melted into something sprayable, and he squeezed the ball. A fine mist came out. He added an adjustable tip so he could direct the spray. That is the atomizer. And within 40 years, every perfume bottle on every dressing table in America would descend from what this doctor built. This is the Scent Archive, a monthly podcast and companion piece to Immortal Perfumes. Each episode, we follow our noses to uncover the hidden histories of the perfumed past. I'm your host, JT Siems, perfumer and curator of Immortal Perfumes. Join me in the archive. Today's curio, the doctor and the atomizer. Welcome back to the Scent Archive, dear listeners. Last month, we journeyed through the islands of Hawaii and discovered how pikake got its name. This month, we are going somewhere far more humble. Toledo, Ohio, in the late 1880s, so same time period. Before then, that psh, psh sound you hear when you spray a bottle of perfume, it was unheard of. Perfume was applied with a dab or a splash, and the whole cultural ritual of the squeeze, the mist, the press of a button simply did not exist. And to understand why that mattered, we need to travel back across millennia. The word perfume comes from the Latin perfumum, meaning through smoke. In ancient civilizations, among the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans, scented smoke was used to perfume rooms and as an offering to the gods. When materials were not burned, they were dabbed, because the early perfumes of antiquity were made with thick, viscous oils. Think olive oil. After the fall of Rome, Europe was plunged into the Dark Ages, but Arab chemists and perfumers did extraordinary work to perfect perfume during this period. A Persian doctor named Avicenna is credited with creating the distillation process, and in Persian culture, rose water especially was used to scent everything. These essences, now made with alcohol, were still dabbed. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, a perfume called Queen of Hungary water was created for, you guessed it, the Queen of Hungary. Although there is some mystery around whether it was actually made for the queen or for a saint. Queen of Hungary water is credited as the first perfume as we know perfume today. There were various recipes, and it was not only used as a perfume, but also doubled as a medicinal tonic. The queen had terrible migraines, and one of the prescribed uses of Queen of Hungary water was to drink it. Queen of Hungary water was kept in a regular glass or ceramic bottle, and it was dabbed, rubbed onto a piece of fabric, or carried around in a pomander. Over the next centuries, perfumery advanced, and eau de cologne in particular became wildly popular. Outbreaks of plague and cholera kept perfume and medicine intertwined, in part because of the theory of miasma, the belief that bad smells were what caused and carried disease. In 1811, we get one of the first precursors to the atomizer. It was a compression fountain that released perfume as a fine mist. And it's frequently miscredited as a vaporizer, but it really wasn't. It was just a gimmicky novelty fountain. In 1861, Eugene Rimmel as in the makeup company, marketed a device that could perfume an entire theater in 10 minutes. And that was a true vaporizer, or as the French called it, a vaporisateur, which I'm probably pronouncing terribly. But it was about public spectacle. There was no perfume ritual here, and nothing that the average woman could keep on her vanity. At the 1867 Exposition Universelle in Paris, several competing vaporizer designs went on display, with Guerlain and Luban among the houses showing early atomizers. But this was a trade show. It was essentially a world's fair, and the atomizers were not part of any personal perfume practice. They were objects to dream about, not objects that you could buy and put on your vanity. In 1876, getting closer now to our good doctor, a patented device dripped perfume continuously throughout the day. Think Victorian-era Glade plug-in. Most of the European vaporizers of this period work more like what we would now call a diffuser. And in 1890, a pistol-shaped perfume sprayer briefly trended in France, and people would shoot it at guests arriving at their booth because, again, trade show, and it was an eccentric prank and a bit of showmanship. In 1891, a theater performance used vaporizers from the orchestra pit to spray 9 different perfumes across different scenes, the first olfactory theater. It was meant to be this sensory art piece, but the audience thought it was hilarious. They were not transcended. They were like, what the hell is happening right now? It was very innovative, though, and I actually went to a scent concert last year by the Icelandic perfume brand Fishersund, and it was incredible. So I imagine it could have been like that, and it's just interesting how something that was a novelty 200 years ago is still kind of a novelty now because we haven't really explored more that perfume can offer. But the last piece of the European puzzle when it comes to the atomizer was a gorgeous poster painted by Alphonse Mucha. And if you've ever seen a Mucha, it was Art Nouveau, all curves and lush ornament, you know what I mean. In this one, a woman is spraying perfume onto a cloth, probably a handkerchief, because throughout history, perfume served as something to mask other unpleasant smells. It was about hygiene, not adornment. Illness again, remember? And this poster was one of the first depictions of a person actually using a vaporizer. Before Mucha, most images of these devices just looked like medical drawings or patent illustrations. So by the 1890s, the atomizer in France, it was a theatrical device. A novelty, a poster child for Art Nouveau, a way to perfume a theater, a pistol-shaped party trick, and an object of avant-garde art. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles west in Toledo, Ohio, a country doctor was trying to figure out how to spray goose grease to relieve a sore throat. Dr. Alan DeVilbiss was a Civil War veteran who served with the 100th Indiana Infantry and participated in the siege of Vicksburg. He was discharged in 1863 and afterward became a country doctor. In 1887, looking for new opportunities, he moved to Toledo, where in his mid-40s, he became the city's first ear, nose, and throat specialist. In the 1880s, the standard treatment for a throat infection was to swab the inside of the patient's throat with petroleum jelly or goose grease on cotton. It was basically rendered fat on a stick, shoved down a sore throat. And a contemporary account called it not a pleasant remedy, but as effective as possible. Very low bar. This was the problem Dr. DeVilbiss was trying to solve, and his solution was delightfully un-French. While Paris was perfuming theaters and shooting perfume pistols, DeVilbiss was trying to not choke patients with goose fat. He began tinkering in the shed behind his house and using an oil can and a rubber ball, and he built what became the first atomizer. The truly novel piece was the nozzle. It was adjustable, so the spray could be aimed in any direction. Because they were still working with goose fat, though, the grease had to be heated before spraying, or it would just congeal, a bit like cooking bacon or anything else with high fat content. Like many visionary inventors, Dr. DeVilbiss had this powerful new tool, and when he took it to manufacturing companies and medical supply firms, none of them wanted it. So he founded what would become the DeVilbiss Manufacturing Company himself. It started as a family operation. Dr. DeVilbiss did the production at home and enlisted his children to help pack orders, and the early plant was an old winery on Toledo's north side. By 1890, the same year that the French were shooting each other with perfume pistols, he was able to retire from medicine completely and run his business full time. From then until his death in 1917, the company sold thousands of medical devices, and the doctor stayed deeply embedded in his community. He was a trustee of the Lucas County Academy of Medicine, and he kept inventing. He had a particular interest in brain surgery and actually invented surgical instrument that replaced the chisel and mallet for cranial procedures. Which, hearing the words chisel, mallet, and brain surgery in the same sentence is horrifying. The US government adopted his new method. And as a quick side note, according to the family memoir, the DeVilbiss family traces back to Holland, and the name itself likely comes from devil's bit, a medicinal plant used in the Middle Ages to treat skin disease, which is a fun little echo given where this story ends up. Caspar DeVilbiss and his brothers worked their way across the Atlantic sometime before the Declaration of Independence and landed in Baltimore, and the family fanned out from Maryland over the next century. The capital V in DeVilbiss came later, courtesy of a missionary cousin named John Wesley DeVilbiss, who was sent to the Republic of Texas in the 1840s. And while he was away on the circuit, his name showed up on a list of ministers with a capital V, and he just kept it. They were also quite concerned about the name being pronounced DeVilbiss as opposed to DeVilbiss. And you know how people were back then with religion, so it was probably a good call. Back to our doctor. His brother Thomas wrote of him, he was always greatly interested in the support of civic activities, but it was not his wont to aspire to personal preferment and public honors. Dr. DeVilbiss was a practical man who believed in science and medicine, and he did not care about showmanship or artistic pursuit. No pistol perfumes for him. And that brings us to his sons. Dr. DeVilbiss had several children, and two of his sons followed him into invention. Alan DeVilbiss Jr. invented a scale and started his own company and ran that successfully for many years before a larger company bought it out. And Thomas DeVilbiss worked alongside his brother for a bit before casually inventing spray painting. And I'll come back to that. Both brothers were exceptional product designers, and Dr. DeVilbiss spent years asking them to join the family firm. And finally, in 1905, wanting to please his father, Thomas agreed to buy a half interest. He was 27, and he had a vision for his father's invention that his father did not share. He saw how the atomizer could be adapted, made more artistic, and made beautiful. And some context here. Dr. DeVilbiss had at one point owned a local drugstore, and in this era, perfume was not really mass-produced in America. You went to your corner apothecary and they would have a big book of recipes, sometimes 11 different formulas for eau de cologne alone. You would ask for eau de cologne or Queen's Bouquet or whatever was in fashion, and they would mix it for you. The doctor had deep apothecary connections through both his old drugstore and his current medical device business, which is how Thomas ended up in conversation one day with a local druggist who was complaining. The perfume atomizers that were being imported from Europe kept breaking, and there was no way to fix them. And we don't know exactly which European company was making them, and there's no way to prove who did it first, but that conversation was the seed. Thomas took his father's atomizer nozzle and fixed it to a glass salt shaker. Then he brought the prototype back to the druggist, and the druggist was like, "This is brilliant." And Thomas was like, "Great, we could make these in America and we could fix them when they break," because there was no return policy for French perfume atomizers in 1905. So Thomas went to his father, showed him the prototype, and pitched the diversification. And he said, "Let's work with American glass companies, produce gorgeous perfume bottles, let's go global." Dr. DeVilbiss would not hear of it. In his mind, perfume was a frivolous pursuit, and there was no higher calling than his invention as a medical device, which when you put it like that, I sort of get it. But two things can be true at once. It took 2 years of arguing. DeVilbiss was in his mid-60s. Thomas was in his late 20s, and they fought about it. Finally, the doctor relented. In 1907, DeVilbiss Perfumizers launched, and the patent followed in 1908. The earliest ones were still glass salt shakers with metal atomizer mounts screwed on top, and they were priced at $1.25. They were affordable, but very plain. And almost immediately, the perfume bottles outsold the medical atomizers. Now, Thomas had proof of concept, and the perfumizer was doing something perfume had never done before. It was tactile. You squeezed the bulb and it made a sound. And crucially, it was the first time that perfume could be advertised as something that you sprayed rather than dabbed. With an oil, too much was way too much, but when you had a light, fine mist, the perfume was not quite so heady. In 1910, Thomas made his first sourcing trip to Europe. Czech glassware had been prized for centuries, and some of the early bottles that he sourced came from the same houses that were supplying Guerlain. And this is when DeVilbiss became a global company. Then World War I happened. American soldiers came home from France carrying these ornate French perfume atomizers, glass, bulb, tassel, and that aesthetic took root in America almost overnight. Before the war, women had the plain DeVilbiss salt shaker bottle. After the war, they had a taste for that European vessel. And after the war is when DeVilbiss exploded. Dr. DeVilbiss died in 1917. And it's interesting, when you look at his obituary, it talks about the company and his presidency of it. But by that point, the perfume bottles had so overtaken the medical devices that he wasn't even remembered as a doctor anymore. He was remembered as a titan of business. Thomas had the foresight to hire an artistic designer, Frederick Villemaneau. Ooh, pronunciation, so sorry. I'm so bad at French. Anyway, he was a graduate of the School of Decorative Arts in Paris, and together they founded an in-house art school at the DeVilbiss plant, and they taught their methods of engraving and bottle design to other students, including women. In 1925, Thomas and Frederick traveled to what is now known as the 1925 Exposition in Paris, and this was the exhibition where the term Art Deco was first coined. Pictures from the perfume hall, there was a whole hall, mind you, are just stunning. And René Lalique installed a glass set piece that we would now recognize as quintessentially Art Deco. It kind of looked like flowing orbs that went into waves. It's absolutely stunning. I will put a picture in the show notes. And that trip is what shaped the look. When you picture a DeVilbiss Atomizer today, or even any early 20th century atomizer in general, you think of the Art Deco lines and the geometric ornament. And that's why they went to Paris and they brought it home. And this is how a Toledo company suddenly looked like it had been designed on the Rue de Rivoli. By the mid-1920s, 1 million perfumizers a year were selling in America alone. The company had outlets in Europe, Canada, and Cuba, and there was a plant in Windsor, Ontario for the Canadian market. By 1929, DeVilbiss had offices in Brussels and Paris. The glass suppliers were a who's who of the century: Steuben, Cambridge, Fry, Durand, Lenox, and Moser. Czech houses in Bohemia supplied a huge share of production from 1925 to 1938, and afterward they shifted to Murano, the island of Venetian glassmakers. The factory employed hundreds of men and women, and they had a wonderful machine called the Maypole that decorated the atomizer bulbs by stringing silk into netting and dotting it with beads. And that is the netting that you see over the bulbs on antique DeVilbiss bottles. In-house, the factory did the decoration and the metalwork for the nozzles, while the glass itself came from outside. They put out a yearly catalog featuring every bottle on offer, and it's a gorgeous artifact full of candy-colored ornate glass objects. And let me read you a little of how they sold themselves. They wrote, "A fascinating assembly of toilet requisites, introducing ultra-modern finesse in the use of perfumes and toilet waters. The myriad charms of color, form, and decoration are subtly suggestive of the exquisite purposes for which they are designed. Women of fastidious taste can now use heavy odors with impunity, for the DeVilbiss spray transforms the fragrance to just the delicate consistency desired. A gentle pressure of a silken bulb releases myriad atoms of fragrance, a drop of perfume miraculously transformed into spray from a fountain in fairyland. Truly the ultimate in beauty and convenience, the finesse of the toilet, a DeVilbiss Perfumizer. And on their perfume lights, they wrote, perfume can be placed in a small concealed cup where it is slowly volatilized by the warmth of the electric bulb within. And for those watching, I am showing a perfume light from the 1926 catalog right now, gold and turquoise with a peacock on it. And you would open a little compartment, the bulb sat inside, and the glass refracted the light outward. At the top, a small piece of cloth could be infused with whatever perfume you liked, so it was a diffuser and a nightlight at once. Perfume lights were not as popular as the bottles and only sold for a couple of years, which makes them a true collector's item. All right, fast forwarding a bit to May of 1928. Thomas DeVilbiss was 49 years old, and the Imperial series was about to launch. 48 bottles in opalescent fauve glass, jade, coral, and yellow, filigree, caged, jeweled. Some were featuring Art Nouveau maidens with flowing hair. They retailed for $25, about $500 today, and these are the bottles that sell at auction now for tens of thousands. Thomas sailed for Europe, but he was ill when he returned. During his final illness, he didn't stop working and he didn't retreat, and the plant published a memorial page after his death. It's short, and I want to read it. This photograph of Mr. DeVilbiss was taken in May 1928. A few days after the sitting, he sailed for Europe, and while he apparently enjoyed the voyage, he was ill when he returned. His interest in business and civic activities never abated, and during his last illness, he directed a building fund campaign for the Toledo YMCA, which was brought to a successful conclusion about 2 weeks before his passing. We here at the plant, who were associated with him so constantly, find it difficult to realize that he will never return. The kindly eyes of the photograph smile back at us with a steadfastness that seems to say, he is not dead, he is just away. He is not dead, he is just away. His employees wrote that about him. Thomas was a beloved man. He died right before the Great Depression, and the Depression obviously hit perfume hard because you needed to eat. That was more important than perfuming yourself. So sales of luxury bottles cratered, and what kept DeVilbiss alive through those years was the other thing the family had quietly invented, spray painting. And it was Thomas that invented the spray paint gun. Years earlier, the brothers had figured out how to adapt the atomizer principle into an industrial paint sprayer, and it transformed manufacturing. It cut lacquer drying times on furniture and automobiles from weeks to hours. So in the 1930s, with the perfume side gasping for air, the spray gun side is what carried the company. Then World War II arrived, and perfume production stopped entirely. What DeVilbiss did during the war is one of those wild arcs of industrial history. They turned the spray coating technology toward the war effort, and specifically toward coating the insides of artillery shells to stabilize the explosive material within. So one Ohio doctor's atomizer designed to spray goose grease down a sore throat ended up coating the interior of munitions. And the company received notes of distinction from the US government for their work. And here is how embedded DeVilbiss was in Toledo, even at the height of all that. In 1941, there was a factory basketball team called the Sprays, named for the product, named for the thing that Thomas had built. That spring, they played a rubber game against a team from Monroe, and each side had won once, and they shared the bill that night with Tom Herman, Michigan's All-American footballer, at a high school court in Toledo. The Toledo Blade covered it as if everyone in Toledo already knew who the Sprays were, because they did. 13 years after Thomas died, the factory that he built still fielded a basketball team his workers wanted to play for, and the local paper did not need to explain who they were. The name of the product had become the name of the community. And after the war, perfume production resumed in 1946, but the world that had wanted perfumizers, vanity tables, silken bulbs, ritual application by the lady of the house, it was already drifting away. The slow decline took 2 decades. The perfume line ended in 1968, after 62 years. The company merged with Champion Spark Plug in 1970, and Illinois Tool Works acquired the pieces in 1990. DeVilbiss High School, which was named for Thomas, opened in 1931, so just a couple years after he died, and it closed in 1991. And yet the brand survives. You can buy a DeVilbiss spray gun. You can buy a DeVilbiss nebulizer. And Dried Medical makes respiratory equipment under the DeVilbiss name for hospitals. And they still pay homage in the technical specs to the man who just wanted a simpler way to help his patients. But no one at any of the DeVilbiss companies today makes a perfume bottle anymore. The bottles live in collector's cases now. The high school is gone, the sprays are gone, and the factory is gone. But in Toledo, if you know where to look, the name is still everywhere. The rich men of the early 20th century were no saints. They broke strikes, polluted rivers, and paid women pennies to crochet bulb knittings at their kitchen tables. But they also built libraries, museums, YMCAs, and hospital wings, and they did it in the cities where they lived, next to the people who made them rich. Thomas DeVilbiss belonged to Toledo the way few wealthy men belong to anywhere today. He sat on the school board, he sat on the art museum board, and he gave a large gift to the museum after his death. He was Commodore of the Toledo Yacht Club, and he raised the YMCA fund from his sickbed. While Paris was building its perfume empire on grand expositions and theatrical spectacle, Toledo was building one on something quieter. A doctor's practical mind, a son's eye for beauty, and a company that stayed put, that hired locally and gave locally. And that is what's worth remembering. Not the grief, but the belonging. And on a happier note, let's talk about the collector's market for DeVilbiss bottles. For those watching, I'm showing a selection of the DeVilbiss bottles in my collection. Several are black and gold, all from the early 1920s through 1927, and one of mine still has its DeVilbiss hang tag, and it's one of my most prized possessions. It's stunning. Prices range, and a lot of it depends on condition. People also mix DeVilbiss bottles up with others because not everyone was actually marked. Durand was a competitor, and even some of the medical devices sometimes get mistaken for perfume bottles. Depending on condition, a bottle can range from $800 to $6,000, and at auction with the right year and the right room, it could go even higher. The big perfume bottles auction this year is on May 2nd, 2026, and it features several gorgeous DeVilbiss pieces. I have another video linked in my show notes that walks through all of the DeVilbiss bottles on offer this year, and the headline piece is a stunning pink and gold rose motif bottle with a beautiful bulb, and there are also several King Tut atomizers, DeVilbiss's Egyptian Revival series, estimated around $1,000 each, though at these auctions, the prices, especially for something so rare, often go much higher. I got most of my collection without spending much. The first one I owned, I didn't even know it was a DeVilbiss until I started researching this episode. It has the DeVilbiss silhouette, kind of a genie in a bottle look, and a friend gave it to me years ago from an antique store that she had popped into. The clearest tell for a DeVilbiss is the shape of the nozzle, though obviously it's even better when you find one with the actual mark DeVilbiss on it. And I just got back from the International Perfume Bottles Association convention in Chicago, and it was wonderful. Last year, I picked up a tiny little DeVilbiss from another member for about $50, and because it came from a collector, it was in beautiful condition. And this year was just as fun. I got to see quite a few DeVilbiss bottles up close, including a presentation on some of the lesser-known works. Here's what I want to leave you with. Every perfume atomizer today, every bottle on every dressing table, every department store counter, it all descends from a country doctor in a wooden shed in Ohio and from the visionary son who teased out its beauty. A father who thought perfume was vanity and a son who knew that vanity was art. And a town that long after both of them were gone kept the name on a school, a factory team, a YMCA, and a yacht club because they belonged to it and it belonged to them. It was all about community. Well, dear listeners, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the Scent Archive. I have additional videos and photos in the show notes, and for any crafty people out there, I have also included a cross-stitch pattern I created for one of the black and gold DeVilbiss bottles in my collection. If you stitch it up, please tag me in your photos. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts so that others can find the show. And tune in next month for the story of the Parisian orphan who built the most famous perfume house in the world. Until then, join me in the archive.